Have you ever stopped to think about the impact a single decision can have on someone's life? And what if that decision wasn't yours, but someone else's, capable of changing everything around you in ways you didn't expect? That's the legacy of Abigail, a woman whose wisdom and courage at a crucial moment in the history of Israel prevented a tragedy, saved lives, and even changed the future of a king-to-be. When David, the man chosen by God to be king of Israel, was about to make an irreversible mistake driven by anger and injustice, it wasn't an army or a military leader who stopped him from going down a destructive path. It was a woman with a perspective that went beyond the moment, Abigail. She wasn't just Nabal's wife, she was the key to a change that wouldn't only affect her own life, but also the future of an entire nation. But why did a woman who seemed so ordinary have such an impact on such a powerful man? What made Abigail so crucial, not just to David's destiny, but to the destiny of Israel? As you dive into this story, you'll see how wisdom, courage, and faith can change the course of events and leave lasting legacies. And the most remarkable part, how often the real power of a decision lies not in what we do, but in how we choose to act when everything around us seems to be falling apart. David and his men were going through a tough journey, filled with challenges. Besides running from Saul's anger, they were also dealing with a lack of resources. During one of their travels, they came across the sheep of Nabal, a wealthy man from the area, known for his great fortune but also for his harshness. David and his group were simply trying to survive, and whenever they could, they helped those they encountered along the way. They had taken care of Nabal's sheep, protecting them from threats while they were around. For men on the run, a gesture like that wasn't just a kind act, it was a crucial investment in their survival. However, what David expected in return for his generosity was something very different. He made a simple request, a bit of food for his men. It was a small, reasonable ask, something anyone in their right mind would do in that situation. But Nabal, with an astonishing level of arrogance, not only refused the request but publicly insulted David. This disrespect wasn't just indifference, it was a direct insult to David's effort and honor, something he wasn't willing to accept. And who, in their right mind, could stay calm after being humiliated like that? David's anger was immediate. Who wouldn't be furious in a situation like that? He felt betrayed and disrespected by a man who, at the very least, should have been grateful. Instead of acknowledging the effort David and his men had made, Nabal chose to act with contempt. And who could blame David for feeling outraged? After all, David's life was a constant struggle, and at that moment, he felt challenged once again. Armed, and with his men beside him, he set out for Nabal's house, determined to avenge the humiliation he had suffered. In his mind, the only solution was for Nabal to pay for his mistake. However, this hasty decision David made brings up an important question. How do we deal with insults? Often our first reaction is to respond in kind, and maybe even with more force. That's exactly what David did. This is an important lesson. Anger, no matter how justified, can lead us to impulsive decisions. We've all been in situations where someone disrespected us or ignored our efforts. In moments like that, it's easy to let our emotions take over. But does it always solve the problem? With his rash action, David still didn't realize that his anger might make things worse, rather than fix them. As understandable as David's anger was, we can't help but ask, was he making the best choice? How many times in our own lives have we acted without considering the consequences, simply because we were angry or hurt? Acting on hot emotions may feel natural, but often the consequences aren't what we expect. Imagine if David had taken a step back and thought for a moment. Maybe he would have found a wiser way to handle the situation without resorting to violence. David's story teaches us that rushing into action can be dangerous. And it's always worth remembering that, when responding to life's challenges, a pause to reflect can be the key to finding a more effective solution. Of course, at that moment, David couldn't see that. His mind was clouded with indignation, and revenge seemed like the only way to restore his honor. But what if he had paused? What if he had reflected on the consequences of his actions? When we find ourselves in high-pressure situations where our pride is hurt, it's hard to think clearly. However, as we see in David's story, and as often happens in our own lives, our reactions aren't always the best responses. We need to be mindful of the moments when anger starts to take over, and remember that more often than not, the best strategy is to take a step back, reflect, and assess the situation more clearly. What's most interesting is that, even at the peak of his anger, David didn't know that the solution would come in a completely unexpected way. In his mind, he was seeking justice, but he didn't yet know that this justice would come from someone he least expected, Abigail. Her intervention would be the turning point in this story. But before we get to that moment of wisdom and action, take a moment to reflect. How many times have you, too, sought justice impulsively when the real answer was in calmness and reflection? Reflection, as we'll soon see, can open doors to solutions we hadn't imagined, just like it did for David. David's anger burned like fire, and he didn't hesitate. Nabal's insult wasn't just a personal offense. It was a direct blow to his honor and dignity. After helping protect Nabal's belongings, David expected a simple return, something fair, something any sensible person would do. But instead of gratitude, he received disdain. And like many of us in moments of injustice, David reacted with anger. Rather than thinking about the consequences, what he wanted was revenge. Armed and accompanied by 400 men, David set out to confront Nabal. David's anger blinded him to the possible consequences of his actions. In our own lives, we've all gone through moments of intense frustration when the desire for revenge seems like the only answer. We feel disrespected, and naturally, we want to strike back. David wasn't alone in this feeling. Who hasn't wanted to do something to restore order after being wronged? But the question remains, does revenge truly solve anything? In his mind, David believed that by confronting Nabal directly, he would restore his honor and get justice. This idea of immediate justice is something we all can understand. When we are challenged, it's almost instinctive to want to fix the situation right away. But the truth is, just like David, we often make decisions based on impulse, without stopping to reflect on the consequences those decisions may bring. The big lesson here is that anger, even when it's understandable, can be a destructive force. The desire for retribution can lead us to make reckless decisions. How many times in our daily lives do we seek quick answers, only to realize later that it made things worse? David was about to learn that rushing into action, driven by his emotions, wasn't the solution to his problem. As he marched with his 400 men, David didn't know that his anger was about to lead him down an irreversible path. He believed he was doing the right thing, but in reality, he was about to make a decision that would not only change his own destiny, but others as well. In moments like these, it's important to reflect. Is an impulsive reaction driven by anger really what needs to be done? Anger can be blinding, but wisdom offers clearer sight. When we act impulsively, it's easy to lose control. And in losing control, we end up losing more than we realize. Life, no matter how tough, isn't made up of immediate, vengeful answers. David was at his breaking point, ready to cross a line from which there would be no return. But in the midst of this turmoil, something extraordinary was about to happen. Had David taken a moment to reflect, perhaps he would have realized there was a better solution. Maybe he would have seen that true strength lies in acting with intelligence, not anger. Instead of seeking revenge, he could have chosen a wiser path, a path that was, in fact, about to open up in front of him. He didn't know it yet, but the answer was on its way. And the one who brought that answer was Abigail, Nabal's wife. She would enter the story as the voice of reason. But before she could arrive, David was fully set on going his way. As we'll see next, David's impulsive decision would lead to something he never imagined. But as with many situations in our lives, wisdom often arrives when we least expect it. Abigail, Nabal's wife, had learned about the situation from one of her servants. She didn't waste any time. With intelligence and quick thinking, she realized how serious things were and knew she had to intervene before it was too late. Abigail didn't consult her husband, who was clearly a hot-tempered man without much wisdom. She knew that if she left it to him, things would only get worse. Her actions demonstrated profound discernment and courage, something rare and admirable. Unlike Nabal, Abigail didn't act out of pride or arrogance, but with wisdom. She understood that David's anger was justified, but she knew the response to that anger shouldn't be more anger, but something wiser. So, Abigail gathered a large offering of food, something she knew could calm David down. Her decision to act without consulting her husband revealed a strategic mindset and immense courage. Often we make decisions in the heat of the moment, but Abigail had the clarity to act in advance, preventing a tragedy. Think for a moment. How many times in our lives have we found ourselves in situations that demand quick action? What Abigail did was more than just making an offer. She took the lead, unafraid to act with wisdom. This type of strategic and calculated action is often what we lack in moments of intense conflict. Instead of waiting for things to unfold, she recognized that the key to preventing disaster was in her hands. When a situation seems ready to explode, a smart action might just be the solution. Abigail knew that the situation between David and Nabal could lead to irreparable destruction. She didn't wait for things to resolve on their own. When you see a problem on the horizon, the first thing you need to do is act. What Abigail did was take action before the worst could happen. Sometimes the best solution isn't to wait for the crisis to resolve itself, but to act wisely and carefully. This is something we can all apply to our lives. The readiness to act with wisdom, especially when emotions and desperation are running high. Her actions weren't just intelligent, but also generous. Abigail offered the best she had in a gesture of peace. She understood that to avoid the worst, it would take more than a simple apology. It required an act of courage and generosity. Like her, often the solution to a big problem lies in our own resources, whether it's an attitude, an act of kindness, or a word of comfort. True wisdom lies in recognizing what is needed and responding in a fair and balanced way. Abigail knew that time was against her. There was no time to waste, and she understood that if she didn't act quickly, David's anger could result in an irreversible tragedy. Her decision to act without consulting Nabal reflects a rare skill, the discernment to know when it's necessary to act alone. This teaches us a valuable lesson. Often, wisdom lies in acting at the right moment, without waiting for permission or support from others. Abigail did what needed to be done without hesitation. As Abigail prepared to meet David, she knew she was racing against time. She didn't have any guarantees that her intervention would succeed, but what she didn't know was that her courage and wisdom would change the fate of everyone involved. At that moment, she became the link between destruction and the preservation of many lives. Her ability to act swiftly and wisely is something we can all strive for in our own lives, especially in times of crisis. Abigail didn't let the opportunity pass by. She seized it, and that made all the difference. With that, Abigail set off, carrying not just the food but the hope that she could calm David's fury. Her actions would be the key to preventing the worst. But as we'll see next, Abigail's intervention not only pacified David, but also changed his perspective on what truly matters. Sometimes true wisdom arises when someone dares to act with courage without being paralyzed by fear. When Abigail finally stood before David, she bowed to the ground, showing humility and respect. Unlike her husband, who had acted with arrogance and disdain, Abigail took a completely different approach. She recognized the seriousness of the situation and with wisdom took the blame for Nabal's mistake, even though she had done nothing wrong herself. This humility was what immediately caught David's attention, who was on the verge of making an impulsive and fatal decision. David, consumed by anger, hadn't expected this from Abigail. He had expected to find someone as stubborn and arrogant as Nabal, but instead, he found a wise and composed woman. By bowing and asking for forgiveness, Abigail not only apologized for her husband's behavior, but also acknowledged David as the future king of Israel. She didn't just seek to calm David down, she did so with deep reverence, recognizing his authority. This acknowledgement deeply moved David and helped to disarm his anger. This moment was pivotal for David, as he was being challenged to see the situation from a new perspective. Instead of continuing to feed his rage, he was forced to reflect on Abigail's wisdom and humility. This teaches us a valuable lesson. When we're in conflict, often the way the other person positions themselves can completely transform our reaction. Instead of staying trapped in a cycle of anger and aggression, Abigail introduced a perspective of humility and peace. Her attitude made David question whether revenge was truly the answer to what he was feeling. In many conflicts, the best way to deal with the situation isn't to confront the person with more anger or pain, but to offer something different: wisdom, respect, and humility. David found himself face to face with a woman who, without raising her voice or resorting to aggressive arguments, managed to make him reconsider his decision. This is a great example of how leadership doesn't come from force, but from wisdom and the ability to yield when necessary. David's response wasn't immediate, but as he listened to Abigail, he began to realize the depth of her words. He, who had been ready to kill, was moved by her humility and her courage to take responsibility for her husband's mistake. When we see someone humble themselves, acknowledging their own mistakes or those of the people they are associated with, it has the power to touch our hearts deeply. Often, we find ourselves in situations where anger and pride blind us, and it's only when someone offers something genuine, like Abigail did with her humility, that we can reassess our actions. As David listened to Abigail, he began to understand that revenge would not bring the peace he desired. On the contrary, he began to realize that what Abigail was offering him was more valuable than any act of violence, a way to resolve the conflict without destroying everything around him. This shows that in many situations we can be driven to act without thinking about the consequences. However, by looking at the other person with humility and consideration, we can find solutions that allow us to grow and evolve as human beings. This was the case with David, who in the face of Abigail's wisdom had his anger disarmed. In the end, meeting Abigail not only prevented David from making an irreversible mistake, but it also provided him with a new perspective on the situation. Sometimes true leadership lies in knowing how to listen to others, acknowledging our own limits, and acting with wisdom, even when everything around us urges us to act out of anger. David was fortunate to learn a lesson in humility at that moment, something he would surely carry with him for the rest of his life. When David listened to Abigail's words, he experienced an internal transformation. What had started as a burning rage, fueled by wounded pride and indignation, began to give way to a moment of reflection. Instead of moving forward with his decision for revenge, he found himself facing a much more powerful choice: the choice to listen, reflect, and change direction. Abigail's wisdom touched his heart deeply, and he realized that she had acted with a perspective that he, at that moment, did not possess. The anger that consumed him now seemed small in light of the clarity Abigail brought. As he listened to Abigail, David understood that true strength didn't lie in retaliating aggressively, but in choosing peace and discernment. He recognized that, instead of revenge, the best response was to acknowledge Abigail's wisdom and give thanks for the divine intervention she represented. "Blessed be you, Abigail," he said. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. The encounter with Abigail was for David a clear sign that God was guiding him toward a different, wiser choice, one more aligned with what truly mattered. This realization not only soothed his anger, but also reaffirmed his confidence that God was with him. What David did next is a powerful example of humility and wisdom. He thanked God for Abigail's intervention and decided not to carry out his revenge. Often, when we're consumed by anger, we forget that a greater force is at work. David, however, was able to recognize that his decision to forego revenge wasn't a weakness, but an act of true strength. Sometimes, choosing not to respond to an insult doesn't mean being weak or passive. On the contrary, it means acting with courage and maturity as David did. He made a decision that reflected his vision for the future, not just his momentary emotions. This kind of heart change, the ability to stop and reflect, is what separates us from impulsive and destructive actions. Life often puts us in situations that require us to set aside pride and anger to do something nobler. David had the opportunity to learn this, and his response was a true demonstration that choices made with wisdom can not only change the course of a situation, but also shape our character in a way that strengthens us. When someone like Abigail offers us a new perspective, it can open our eyes to paths we never imagined. When David let go of revenge, he also freed himself from a burden. Sometimes, when we hold on to feelings of anger and the desire for retribution, we think we are keeping justice in our hands. But in reality, we are only sinking deeper. By letting go of revenge, David was freed from the control that anger had over him. He made a choice that later would prove to be pivotal for his reign and his walk with God. We learn that true strength doesn't lie in taking justice into our own hands, but in recognizing when the right action is to release our anger. By changing his heart, David not only avoided a tragedy, but also strengthened his ability to lead. He learned through Abigail's wisdom that patience and discernment are necessary, and that anger isn't always the way to achieve justice. As he reflected on his actions, he realized that peace was the true goal, and this lesson in peace would extend to his leadership, helping him guide the people of Israel in other decisive moments of his life. The true leader is the one who knows at the right moment to let go of the desire for revenge and choose the path of wisdom. David had the chance to take a new direction, aligned with something greater than his immediate emotions. Abigail's intervention was the turning point he needed to grow, not just as a man, but as a leader. When we reflect on our own actions and feel the desire to change the course of our decisions, we're often at a crossroads. Wisdom lies in recognizing these moments and choosing peace as David did, instead of going down the path of destruction. When Nabal learned about Abigail's intervention, he was completely shaken. The news had such a powerful impact on him that he suffered a stroke, both a physical and emotional blow so severe that it left him incapacitated. 10 days later, Nabal died, and his death was seen by David as a manifestation of divine judgment. For David, Nabal's death wasn't just a natural consequence of a man's arrogance leading to his downfall. He saw it as a form of divine justice, a correction from God for something that had been done to him and to others. Nabal's sudden death also raises an important reflection on the impact of our actions and how fate often takes care of justice when we don't know or can't do so ourselves. In the heat of the moment, it's easy to act with arrogance, not considering the consequences, thinking we can always get away unscathed. In Nabal's case, his stubbornness and lack of humility led him to an abrupt fall. Sometimes, unchecked pride can become a burden too heavy to carry. We see this here. Nabal's senseless attitude led him to a tragic end. For David, Nabal's death also served as an important reminder. Even when we don't take justice into our own hands, divine justice can manifest in ways we don't expect. David felt, in a way, relieved, but at the same time, this event made him reflect on the fine line between revenge and justice. What seemed like a stroke of luck or immediate justice for David was, in fact, a reminder that he wasn't in control of everything. When situations take unexpected turns, it's essential to reflect on how our attitudes and reactions can create a chain of consequences. In Nabal's case, his quick and unexpected death marked the end of a story of arrogance and disdain. The message here is clear: no one is above the law, and a lack of consideration for others, dishonesty and arrogance can have devastating effects. Nabal, by rejecting David's help and acting with arrogance, sealed his fate. No matter how strong or wealthy someone is, the lack of wisdom and humility can be the factor that brings them down. This kind of behavior, although it may seem effective in the short term, ends up being a heavy burden in the long run. Nabal's death, which seems so imposing and invulnerable, serves as a great lesson. Sometimes in our own lives, we're tempted to act with arrogance and pride, thinking that our social position, power, or wealth makes us immune to consequences. But Nabal showed the opposite. No one is immune to the effects of their own choices. Humility, wisdom, and respect for others are values that should always prevail, as ignoring them can lead us down unexpected paths. What happened with Nabal also reinforces the idea that often revenge doesn't need to be taken by us. True justice can be carried out by greater forces or by fate itself. When David recognized Nabal's death as divine judgment, he understood that, even in difficult situations, the control over everything is not in our hands. Sometimes, it's necessary to let time and natural consequences do their work. That's what David saw happen with Nabal. Divine justice was carried out without him needing to act directly. Nabal's death was the result of his own choices, but it also served as a warning to us all. Acting with arrogance, disregarding others, and refusing to acknowledge our mistakes can lead us to an inevitable downfall. The lesson is clear. Humility, respect, and wisdom are the paths that protect us from the disastrous consequences of a life guided by pride. Instead of seeking revenge, often the best choice is to let natural consequences take their course. After Nabal's death, Abigail found herself facing an unexpected and monumental change in her life. David, recognizing her wisdom, courage, and discernment, asked her to marry him. Her actions during such a critical moment had not gone unnoticed. Abigail, who had acted with such skill and intelligence to save lives, now found herself presented with a new opportunity, a chance to change her own destiny and take on a new role in the history of Israel. She was celebrated not just for her beauty, but for her strength of character. By offering Abigail marriage, David was not only expressing gratitude, but also recognizing the importance of her wisdom in his life and future reign. This gesture was not just a reward, but a recognition of Abigail's strategic vision, a wisdom that would be essential when David took the throne of Israel. Abigail, for her part, accepted the proposal with humility, once again demonstrating her noble character. She did not feel superior or arrogant. On the contrary, her response reflected her understanding of the importance of each moment and the role she was meant to play. Abigail's marriage to David was not just a personal event, but an important milestone in Israel's history. With her wisdom and intelligence, Abigail brought emotional and strategic stability to David, which would later prove to be crucial in his leadership. In many moments of his life, David would need clear, wise counsel, and Abigail would become an essential source for that. Beyond being a symbol of recognition, this marriage represented a union of strengths that would contribute to the prosperity of David's future reign. For Abigail, marrying David also meant stepping away from her former life. She was leaving behind Nabal's house with all its materialism and arrogance to unite with a man who, though pursued and exiled, represented the hope of a more just and grand future. By making this decision, Abigail demonstrated her faith in something greater, something beyond the immediate circumstances. Her wisdom was in recognizing David's potential and understanding the importance of being part of a future that, though uncertain, seemed to be guided by higher principles. Abigail's change of destiny teaches us a valuable lesson: how our decisions can shape our future. Often when we make wise and courageous choices, the path opens up before us in ways we hadn't imagined. By acting with wisdom, Abigail had the opportunity to not only change David's life but also her own, reaching a new level of influence and significance. This shows us that, even in difficult times, choosing to do what's right can lead us to surprising and transformative destinations. Marrying David was not just a change of status for Abigail, but an opportunity to influence the future of a nation. She wasn't just a king's wife, she became a counselor, a woman of great wisdom whose influence on David had a lasting impact on his life and reign. Abigail became a central figure in a story that went beyond her marriage, playing a crucial role during Israel's transitional moment. With her intelligence and courage, Abigail was much more than a wife to David. She became a strategic ally, someone whose advice and decisions helped shape Israel's future. Her role wasn't just that of a companion, she was a true advisor and guide. By accepting this new role, Abigail not only changed her own destiny, but also made a significant contribution to Israel's history. The story of Abigail is rich with lessons that transcend time. One of the most powerful lessons we can learn from her is the importance of acting with wisdom and discernment in moments of crisis. When everything seemed to be falling apart, Abigail did not allow herself to be driven by haste or the emotions of the moment. She was able to assess the gravity of the situation, choose the right moment to act, and make decisions that prevented a tragedy. In a world where immediate reactions often prevail, Abigail's wisdom teaches us that patience and strategic thinking are powerful tools. Another valuable lesson from Abigail's story is humility. Even though she was the wife of a wealthy and powerful man, Abigail did not hesitate to bow before David and take responsibility for her husband's wrongdoing, even though she herself had done nothing wrong. This act of humility and repentance was key in calming David and disarming his anger. In many situations in life, we are challenged to adopt a posture of humility, especially when our ego or pride is at stake. Abigail teaches us that by being humble and sincere, we can disarm even the hardest of hearts. Abigail also teaches us the importance of acting with courage, even when facing the unknown. She knew that by meeting David, She risked making things worse, but she didn't hesitate to act. She understood that the risk of doing nothing would be far greater. In difficult moments, the courage to do what's right can be a turning point. Abigail's courage, taking action without knowing exactly what would happen, saved many lives, including her husband Nabal's, as well as David and his men. Her courage was not only physical, but also emotional and moral, and that is what makes her a true hero. Another crucial lesson is about the power of having a long-term vision. Abigail did not allow herself to be swayed by the immediacy of the situation. She understood that by resolving the conflict with David, she was, in fact, creating a new future for herself. Often, our immediate actions are reactive, focused on what troubles us in the present. However, Abigail showed that it's possible to choose a path that, while challenging in the moment, will bring long-term benefits. Her understanding that her choices could change the future is something we can all apply in our own lives. Additionally, Abigail's story highlights the power of generosity and service to others. By bringing food to David, Abigail wasn't just calming his anger, but performing a great act of generosity. This act of kindness, even in times of crisis, had a powerful and lasting effect. In our own lives, generosity doesn't always have to be a grand gesture. It's the willingness to do something for others, to serve without expecting anything in return. Abigail teaches us that generosity has the power to transform situations and hearts. Abigail also shows us that often the most challenging circumstances in life can become the greatest opportunities for growth. She was not just a woman seeking safety. She was a woman who used adversity to reveal her true strength and wisdom. She became a woman who directly impacted Israel's future. In our own lives, difficulties should not be seen merely as obstacles, but as opportunities to demonstrate our wisdom, courage, and resilience. Finally, the story of Abigail is a lesson about the power of transforming moments of conflict into opportunities to do good. By acting with discernment, humility, and courage, Abigail not only avoided a tragedy, but also changed the course of her own life. In a world where impulsive reactions often dominate, she teaches us that true strength lies in acting with wisdom and dedicating ourselves to something greater than our immediate emotions. Abigail is remembered as a woman of faith, wisdom, and courage, whose actions had a lasting impact on the future of Israel. She not only prevented an impending tragedy, but also altered the course of history. Her intervention, made with humility and discernment, was the turning point that allowed David to avoid making an irreversible mistake. By choosing wisdom over anger, Abigail not only saved lives in that moment, but also shaped the destiny of a nation. Her legacy is a testament to how a single well-placed action can significantly transform the future. Her story teaches us that often the impact of our actions goes beyond what we can see in the moment. Abigail, by putting herself at risk and intervening to calm David, didn't know she was changing the course of an entire nation. She was not just a wife, but a woman of great vision. By acting with discernment, she became the key to David's preservation, someone who would eventually become the king of Israel and one of the nation's greatest leaders. This type of strategic, well-planned intervention makes all the difference in crucial moments, and Abigail, with her wisdom, proved that. Abigail's legacy also lies in how she handled power. Though married to a wealthy and influential man, Abigail didn't use her position for personal gain or to control others. Instead, she used her intelligence and empathy to help those around her, putting the collective good above personal interests. This teaches us that true power comes from the ability to act with integrity, wisdom, and generosity. Abigail knew her worth was in her ability to contribute to a greater good, and that's what makes her such an admirable woman in history. In her wisdom, Abigail had the courage to confront David, a powerful and angry man, and to make him stop and reconsider. Her intervention, far from being a simple act, reflected her strong character and faith. She trusted that acting justly and strategically wasn't only the right thing to do, but that she was fulfilling a divine purpose. Her legacy isn't just about action, but about alignment with something greater. The courage to intervene with such wisdom in a moment of crisis is an example of faith in action, the belief that by choosing the path of wisdom, you are, in fact, doing what is right before God and others. The impact of Abigail extended beyond her time. When David became king, he remembered her as a woman whose actions saved many lives, including his own. By acting decisively and with a vision beyond the immediate, Abigail not only affected David's life, but also the trajectory of Israel's kingdom. This is the power of choices made with wisdom. They have the ability to create waves of transformation that affect generations. Abigail's legacy continues to be a powerful example of how wisdom and courage can alter the fate of a nation. She is a figure who teaches us the value of strategic intervention and the impact of our actions. In times of crisis, when everything seems to be falling apart, it is wisdom and courage that allow us not only to survive, but to thrive. Abigail's legacy is a lesson in how, even in the face of adversity, we can choose to act in ways that benefit not only ourselves but everyone around us. She did this, and her impact is felt to this day as an example of faith, wisdom, and courage that transcends generations. Abigail is also remembered for her ability to act with humility in moments of great tension. When she bowed before David and asked for forgiveness on behalf of her husband, she not only disarmed his anger, but also placed herself in a position of service and love for others. Her legacy, therefore, is not just that of a woman who saved a life, but of someone who put the greater good above personal pride, demonstrating that through humility and action, we can truly change the course of situations and the lives around us. Abigail not only saved David from anger and revenge, but she also left behind a legacy of wisdom, courage, and humility that transcends time. Her intervention demonstrated that, even in moments of crisis, true strength lies in the ability to act with discernment, to choose peace over anger, and to put the common good above any ego. How many times have you found yourself in situations where anger or pride almost led you to make impulsive decisions? Abigail teaches us that, in such moments, taking a pause to reflect, adopting a humble attitude, and having a long-term vision can turn a potential disaster into an opportunity for growth. Like her, we all have the ability to change our own story and the stories of those around us when we choose to act with wisdom and heart. Now I challenge you, how can you apply Abigail's lessons to your life today? What areas of your life are calling for a moment of reflection, a dose of humility, or a gesture of wisdom? Don't underestimate the power of your choices. They have the potential to not only change your destiny, but also the destinies of many around you. If you want to continue learning how to apply the wisdom and courage of historical figures like Abigail in your own journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. What you choose today could change your tomorrow. Don't miss the next lessons.